This is the Blackprint, where being black is always the topic of conversation. The Blackprint is brought to you by Rhymes and Designs and Good Evil Art.
What's going on, beautiful people? It's your man Art back guest hosting again. Shouts out to MJ for holding it down. This week we're going to get back into this Wall Street discussion. Last time we got together, we got into the history of Wall Street, where the origin of the name comes from. We also broke down a little bit of the history behind the recession and the Great Depression and kind of how Wall Street has fluctuated or changed throughout those time periods. This week, we're going to discuss a little bit deeper the inner workings of Wall Street, go into the history of the banks, the big banks and the insurance companies that trade on Wall Street. We'll also touch a little bit on how these banks or how Wall Street influences politics. That's something that's necessary to discuss. So let's get into these banks a little bit and the insurance companies. But before we officially get into it, I want to share a little bit about my background. I actually studied finance and economics as an undergrad at UNC Charlotte. The reason for me studying those particular majors was because my family was fairly ignorant when it came to money and how to make money grow, how to save money, and things of that nature. So I was actually going to get better informed to better inform my family and to bring it back home, I guess you want to call it. My father was always encouraging me to go to Wall Street, believe it or not, and to become a broker or some type of trader and make money on Wall Street, because he always told me there was so much money to be made there. So that was one of my thought processes in choosing that major as well, was to get the big bucks. I received a master's in management from Duke University, great information there, great network, learned a lot, but it wasn't really to get a job. It was more so to further my knowledge base and to get a better understanding of how to manage my own money and manage my own company and know the inner workings. So if someone's doing something for me, I know exactly how it should be done. I may not be doing it, but I know how it should be done, so I can inform or just bounce ideas off of them. Ultimately, I didn't choose that path. I chose to follow my passion. I'm a playwright. I'm an artist. I love music. I love theater. I love those things. So I've put a lot of my energy into that, rather than going on Wall Street and losing my soul, becoming a trader for real. Yeah, so I am fairly knowledgeable on these topics we are discussing here on the podcast, as far as last week's episode and the episode you're about to get into today. The first institution I want to discuss is Lloyds of London, or simply known as Lloyds. So between 1668 and they say 1807, one of Britain's primary components of its trading system was the slave trade, and Lloyds of London was one of the biggest insurance companies of the time. So they were known to insure the slave transports and to provide policies on getting the enslaved Africans from Africa to the Newfoundland. Considering the fact that Lloyds of London profited greatly from slavery, they were huge proponents of maintaining slavery and fought hard against the abolitionist efforts to end chattel slavery. And another very interesting thing about Lloyds of London is that they actually are not an insurance company at all. They're basically a large bank, a syndicate of banks that work together to spread risk. So they pool all their resources, then fund their individual ventures from that pool of resources. So the rich stay rich, basically. And Lloyds of London is a very exclusive club of banks. It is very private, and they work the way they want to work for 300, 400 years now. As of today, Lloyds of London is trading at $3.51 per share. They have a market cap of $61.69 billion. Market cap is basically how much a company is worth on the market. It is calculated by multiplying the share price times the number of shares outstanding. Currently, Lloyds of London has 17.94 billion shares outstanding, which means there are 17.94 billion shares of a company that built its wealth on the backs of enslaved Africans and on the blood of enslaved Africans. And of course, the Lloyds of London is not the only company that profited in an insurance standpoint. You also have New York Insurance, which in 2002, they came out and issued documents or gave documents showing that that company did issue policies to slave owners for enslaved Africans. You also have Aetna, which was the nation's largest health insurer. Back in 2000, they issued a public apology for their role some 150 years ago, their role in the slave trade. And the list doesn't stop there, but you understand where I'm coming from. Now we can get into the big banks and the bankers. Those people get a lot of attention, but not as much attention as they deserve. So there were many banks that profited off the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. We're going to touch on a few of the big ones right now. The first one I want to talk about is Citibank. Also has branches, Citigroup, they're the umbrella company to Citigroup and a couple other entities. Citibank was originally known as the Citibank of New York and was directed by a gentleman named Moses Taylor. Moses Taylor was originally the director of the Farmers Loan and Trust Company. Back in 1822, he founded that. And as the name indicates, he was loaning money to slavers and basically funding their process and also getting profit back from that. And considering their prowess today, there's no doubt that they were a powerful force back in the transatlantic slave trade. Another interesting thing about Citibank is that Moses Taylor was actually implicated in illegal enslaved African trading, if that's what you want to call it. He gained his fortune from trading in sugar down in Cuba, but there were allegations of him making illegal trades throughout the 1800s, even after 1863, 1865, when it was outlawed in America. So he gained his fortune from illegal slave trade as well. But one thing I did find or could find from it that was fairly interesting is that he's credited for helping to lay the transatlantic cable in 1866, which would have been the year after they ended or tried to end chattel slavery. He was credited for his travels between London and the Newfoundland in laying a transatlantic cable, which was supposedly the first telegraph system between London and New York. The next company I want to discuss is Goldman Sachs. And this company is interesting because I couldn't really find any information on its direct link to the transatlantic slave trade because it was founded in 1869. But I think that some of its funds would come from some profiting from the slave trade. But they credit Goldman Sachs' early fortune to the trading of commercial paper. Commercial paper is basically a promissory note. It's from the issuing bank. They'll sell this to an individual, and the individual will give them money, and the issuing bank promises to pay this individual back at a fixed date, a fixed maturity date with a fixed interest rate. So the person purchasing the initial commercial paper is going to receive some type of profit at a future date. But for the meantime, a company such as Goldman Sachs could invest that money so many different times before the 270 days comes and they have to pay that money back. So that was the company's origin as far as how they initially made their fortune. But I did come across a lot of research linking them to current slave practices, such as their investment in a company called Yuen, an Asian company that is basically the manufacturer, or that was the manufacturer for Nike, Adidas, Reebok, all the big shoe companies. So that sweatshop theory that you heard, it actually is practical. And Goldman Sachs was one of the lead funders of this movement. So in this particular article I read about Goldman Sachs' investment in Yuen, it talks about how when they initially purchased the company, they purchased it even though sneaker sales were falling in America, but profits for that company were still rising because of the wages they were paying, or I guess you want to call them wages, for what they were giving the enslaved Asian people over there. So that was one of the corporate stories I saw. I also saw a few personal stories of Goldman Sachs execs operating as current slave owners, if you want to say so, man. So they were speaking about there was a guy who went to school with a gentleman named Pedro, whose family was involved in the slave trade in Brazil, and they had a large plantation. This guy was a Goldman Sachs exec, and his family had a large plantation still to this day, with over 20 servants on that plantation. And the gentleman that wrote the article was basically saying it was up to date. It was like a modern day hotel palace, but yet they rung bells to receive their food, to receive their drinks. They rang bells and people came. Of course, these were African people in Brazil that came and basically served this gentleman who had never experienced anything like this. And he said he actually didn't appreciate it because it really felt like slavery to him. And let me add, this article was written by a white dude. And like I said, I couldn't really find any historical connections between Goldman Sachs and slavery. But, I mean, that current stuff is definitely something to take account of. Two very interesting things about Goldman Sachs was their original family practices of intermarriage. So Goldman, I may be getting this wrong, but something like this. Goldman's daughter married Sachs' son, and then Astor, who was an investor amongst Goldman and Sachs, Astor's daughter marries Sachs' son, and they just have this group, this family of the rich get richer and keeping the money in the family. So that's interesting. And then you also have the fact that so many of Goldman Sachs CEOs typically transition into politics. So as recently as a gentleman, John Krasinski, he became the governor of New Jersey, and he was the governor from 2006, 2010, after being the CEO of Goldman Sachs. Then you also have people like U.S. Treasury Robert Rubin, Henry Paulson, and just a few other individuals that came out of Goldman Sachs and transitioned directly into U.S. politics. The next big bank, big institution I want to discuss is the Lehman Brothers. So the Lehman Brothers was founded back in the 1840s by, I believe, Emanuel Lehman, and he came from Europe, from Bavaria, and moved to Mobile, Alabama back in those days. And one thing, while researching this article, I learned a lot about, I guess you want to say, Jewish culture. The Lehman Brothers were Jews from Europe. What I did learn was that they were very keen at trading. From what the articles were stating is that they basically lived and died with trading, whether it be trading cattle, cattle parts, things that come from animals, and just that was their lifestyle, was really trade, barter, those type things. So when they came here, trade was second nature for them, and selling things was second nature for them. So Emanuel Lehman was a peddler. He worked in the South, and they basically acquired their fortune trading cotton. The articles basically state that Emanuel was loaned merchandise from another Jew who knew his family from back home in Bavaria. So he basically gave Emanuel a bunch of merchandise. Emanuel sailed up the Alabama River, Mississippi River, one of those rivers, and sold these goods along the coastline, and basically started his business from that money that he sold from the initial help from his Jewish friend. So a year after this initial help, another brother moves from Bavaria to assist Emanuel in this newfound business, and they open up a merchandising store. They actually opened up the merchandising store directly across from the slave auctioning block. This merchandising store basically provided anything a slaver would need to maintain their plantation. So ultimately, the Lehman Brothers profited greatly, and this was the origin of the Lehman Brothers fortune that you see today. So in doing this research, I came across an interesting term that stood out to me, the term Ditsy Jews. There's a whole list of Jewish, I guess you want to say Jewish last names that stem and originate in the South of America. So the Lehman Brothers actually moved to the North in the 1860s, 1870s, and they actually helped establish what what was called the New York Cotton Exchange. They established that in 1870. And due to the prominence of cotton in the world, New York blew up. And even before that, New York was blowing up from the textile industry. And they say that the work in the South actually caused the financial boom of America, because that is what funded the Industrial Revolution. So that was Lehman Brothers, their contribution to the enslavement of Africans. But it gets deeper, even to commercial banks. Banks like Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo actually acquired Wachovia Bank of North Carolina, which was a well-known bank in providing loans or even accepting enslaved Africans as collateral for slavers defaulting on their loans. So Wells Fargo purchased Wachovia. Wachovia, I guess, purchased slaves. You also have banks such as Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase, who have issued public apologies for their role in purchasing companies that have played a role in the slave trade. So that was a brief history of big banks and its relationship with slavery. It is deep. It goes even deeper. We don't want to get into too much of the details of it, how it goes into today in investing in the enslavement of prisoners. It gets way deeper, man. It really does. We could literally talk about Wall Street for hours, how it affects us historically, how it affects us today. But that's not going to necessarily solve our problems. I mean, Wall Street is causing a lot of our problems, but a lot of our issues we are going to solve internally. Yeah, so that concludes the second part of our discussion on Wall Street. Hope you enjoyed it. We're going to close this one out with an inspiring song, a motivational song, and it's actually a song by me. I remember last time we got together, I told y'all I wouldn't do that, but since I won't be guest hosting that often, I think I'll take advantage of being the DJ today. So let's get into Early Days, Late Nights by SU the Guru.
Now feel the raft of 1 and 2's jig. Melody be smooth, content be with the shit. Gotta move like I rock a halo. True and living God, giving real influence, never die. That's my acronym for grind. If you didn't Randy Moss it, your time is most valuable. Spend it doing boss shit. Learn from your losses, don't end up lost. I done seen too many fall out, scared to pay their costs. Everybody get their time to shine. Harlem world limelight of the scene, looking like gold, smelling like green. You know it's the team, good evil art more than a dream. Used to run with those that chase schemes. Now money chase me, fruit dropping up my trees. How much OG get free by any means deemed necessary in this cold world? We only come up, so we grind hard daily like the world ain't enough. Going hard, early days, late nights. I go get it, that green wrap tight. No quitting, I ain't about that life. I go get it, keep that green wrap tight. Going hard, early days, late nights. I go get it, keep that green wrap tight. No quitting, I ain't about that life. I go get it, keep that green wrap tight. This that hustle and flow, get free or die slow. In this dark world, you need that God glow. Help others see, take the lead. Be all you can be, no US Army. The stats alarm me, we locked up. Single parent homes, education sucks, but take it for what it is. You gotta go even harder. Can't rely on drugs, you gotta be even smarter. Protect your honor with your life. Honor protects your soul. Your soul is life. What's a thought without action? A dream without a plan. A man in a casket. Better get up, get active. You only live once, so it's really now or never. Make a decision, give no potential to failure. Nobody stopping you but you. Better get it together. Going hard, early days, late nights. I go get it, that green wrap tight. No quitting, I ain't about that life. I go get it, keep that green wrap tight. Going hard, early days, late nights. I go get it, keep that green wrap tight. No quitting, I ain't about that life. I go get it, keep that green wrap tight.
That was Early Days, Late Nights by SU the Guru. I hope you enjoyed and got something from this episode. Please remember to like and share this with your people. Also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. That was the Blackprint. And as MJ would say, we're sending you love, peace, and ammunition.